And now to tell you all about the hidden esoteric world of Alex Jones, Dan Friesen.
Thank you. So the immediate response that people had, some of our fans, and to hearing before us that we had won this award was, can't wait to hear their acceptance speech for people liking them. And that was fair. And then it turned out that they learned that we did not make it because we didn't know this was happening. And they're like, yeah, that's on brand. That's exactly what we would have expected from them. That's So I'm here to talk a little bit about Alex Jones today. I know there's another Alex Jones here in the UK. That's not who I'm talking about. Alex Jones, the American far-right idiot. I'll be honest with you. My slideshow, I was going to fine-tune and come up with a better title, but what are you going to do? He's an idiot. That's about the best we can do. So some of you probably are aware of our show, Knowledge Fight, but for those of you who are not, I wanted to give a little bit of introduction for the position that I come from. I do this podcast called Knowledge Fight, which is more or less a critical breakdown of episodes of The Alex Jones Show. It's very stupid as an idea for a show, and if you told me that when we started back in 2017 that I would still be doing it and here talking to you all about that, I would never believe it, and I'd probably take a swing at you. The reality is, though, that you can talk about Alex Jones for 7 years because he is a fascinating character and an idiot. He's a unique figure in the media, a true one of a kind, which I don't mean as a compliment in any way. There will never be another figure like him, nor should there be. And I hope in this presentation I'll be able to help you all understand a little bit better why I hold this position. The general theme of the talk that I want to give here today is what people don't get about Alex Jones. And underneath that umbrella, you find many of the things that I think make him interesting. And again, not in a good way. It's interesting like, I don't know, you pull a rock up and you see a bunch of worms and bugs in there. It's interesting. What are they doing under there? It's not good. You don't want to... People don't generally understand Alex Jones, the propagandist, because for the most part, no one critical of him actually listens to his show. Folks take clips curated by outlets like Media Matters and assume that that captures the full picture of what he's about, but in reality, Alex is far more complicated than that. As a little background, I should say that one of the main reasons I decided to start this podcast in the first place was that I stumbled onto some InfoWars content, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't find sane criticism of it anywhere. There were these little tidbits on Media Matters, but their coverage was fairly surface level. Beyond that, there was nothing reliable. There were these blogs about how Alex Jones was right about everything, which is useless. And on the other side, the voices that opposed Alex were equally useless, as they pretty much all approached him from within the same conspiracy paradigm. Most of the information I could find was from people who were out to prove that Alex was secretly a government plant or that he worked for Israel trying to pull off some kind of shenanigans. These were people who were, they were folks who disagreed with Alex, but they were desperate to cling to their conspiracy comfort blanket, so they just expanded their personal conspiracy theory to include Alex within it as a participant. The information that you'd find from these people was useless and mostly involved making tenuous connections between people and events in the exact same way that Alex does. It was a real bummer, but I was going nowhere in my life at the time, like, that's even making it sound too good. I was going nowhere. And it triggered my curiosity to see, like, why isn't anyone talking about this except for other people who are clearly wrong? And so I thought a good use of my time would be to fill this gap that I'd stumbled into. And so that became my mission. I wanted to take an unbiased look as possible at Alex. And I wanted to approach his ideas with a radical empathy that I hoped would overcome the hate and bile that you could hear him spew on his show. It was an interesting exercise because in some ways it worked, and then in other ways it definitely didn't work at all. It worked in the sense that I could hear Alex say something that was far past the point of being offensive to decent people, and I could remove my emotions from the situation and ask, where is he getting this information from? The detachment of pursuing an unbiased position allowed me to hunt for primary sources and put a priority on understanding the what of the show as opposed to what I was feeling from the show. People don't generally believe this, but I did enter the show with the position that if I looked into the primary sources Alex had and it was all solid, that I would need to change my life. I was ready to just straight up accept it and make major changes. And that was a difficult hurdle. The awareness that if this raving madman turned out to be sane and correct, it would require me to fundamentally reassess my relationship with reality. Because if you dig in, you find like, oh, he is right about this stuff, uh-oh. I took that risk, and it turns out Alex is full of shit. So, me and reality, we are still on good terms. This is ultimately where my approach didn't work, though. Eventually, I had to stop trying to be unbiased. It turns out you can only last a few years pretending that maybe this time the thing somebody is saying won't be full of shit. And the compounding of the emotional trauma of the subject matter that he lies about will inevitably lead to any non-robot to abandoning this position of neutrality. I can comfortably say that I think Alex Jones is a liar, a charlatan, and one of the worst people I've ever encountered, but I can also say that I reached this conclusion by way of overly fair assessment and thousands of hours of exposure. For example, it took me about a year to be comfortable saying publicly that Alex was a racist, because from the episodes I'd listened to at that point, an argument could be made that the racist things he was saying, maybe they have a different interpretation. Maybe I'm judging too harshly. It was paramount that if I made a claim about Alex, that I could back it up concretely with the material that he himself created. I tried to be as generous as possible until that generosity was impossible to sustain. This is how I've reached the point where I can confidently say that I probably know more about Alex Jones than just about anybody around. That's not really a brag, though, because honestly, a lot of the stuff about him, you could just guess. Without watching his show, you could probably tell he's a liar, but I know that he's a liar. Without watching it, you could probably tell he's a bigot, but I know just how much of a bigot he is, which is a distinction maybe with no difference. And I also think I know a bunch of things that no one, particularly people in the media, fully grasps. Some of these things are dumb, trivial, alleged facts about Alex's life. Oh God, I want to write a biography of this ding-dong, but it's impossible. His dad was the smartest boy in Texas. That's just one little tidbit. But other things not like that are very important to understanding and knowing the right-wing conspiracy ecosystem and how information is used in these places to lead people astray. And so the first thing that I think that people really, really miss about Alex Jones is that he is actually a liar. This is important. I think that people don't grasp this. I think a lot of people assume that he's a liar, but it's very easy to give accidentally give the benefit of the doubt that he's just wrong about stuff. You know, maybe he has some bad information that he's passing along, as opposed to being like an out-and-out liar. And he's just coming from a place of sincere incorrectness. That's way easier to accept for like the audience, particularly his audience, because you know we all make mistakes. You can make a mistake about one thing, and then the stuff you say about other subjects can be worth taking seriously. Conversely, if you're an out-and-out liar, then it calls into question whether what you say can be accepted about all these other subjects. And Alex is a liar, outright, total liar, willing to say whatever and fabricate whatever he needs in order to make it easier for him to sell the audience on his narratives. There are many examples of this, and often it will just come in the form of embellishing stories, but I want to present to you an example of a time where Alex is caught red-handed intentionally lying about a source because it makes his job easier. I maybe should have warned people ahead of time that I'm going to play some clips, and some of that is pretty offensive for a Sunday morning particularly. But we're going to get through it together. So this clip that I'm going to play here comes from about a week ago. I have examples of his behavior from throughout his career, but I wanted to use this one to illustrate that it continues to this day. In this episode, Alex is having a mini breakdown on air because he's drunk and he's mad that The Economist published an article that was critical of people who spread conspiracy theories about the Rothschild family. Alex is telling his audience that Baron Rothschild is the sole owner of the publication The Economist. So this is clearly an attempt to silence criticism. The Rothschild family is using their own paper to scold people who would criticize them. So there's some problems with this. And the first is that the Rothschild family is not the sole owner of The Economist. Evelyn de Rothschild was the chair of the board of directors from 1972 to 1989, but neither him or his family were primary owners of the publication. This is, at its core, just a lingering talking point that carries over from anti-Semitic conspiracies about the ideas about Jews controlling the media. Alex's entire intellectual history is just him being soaked in books and films made by people who were spreading these anti-Semitic ideas, so it's only natural that he's accepted them as depicting reality without taking the time to look into them and test these ideas. And that kind of brings me to a little second side thing that people don't realize or understand about Alex, and that is that he's intensely lazy. In terms of his career, he does zero work towards learning about the news or any public figures that he demonizes on air. And even bigger picture, he really never has taken the time to reassess any of the John Birch Society-ass extremism that he was born into. He's a painfully uncurious person who puts in minimal effort towards putting on his show, despite his attempts at portraying himself as a serious researcher into the globalist conspiracy. It's going to kill everyone any day now. To get back on track, I'm going to play you this clip of Alex discussing the ownership of The Economist, meant to justify his claim that the Rothschilds own the whole thing.
Sir Evelyn Robert de Rothschild, The Economist newspaper, Ltd. The Economist newspaper, limited, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Economist Group. Sir Evelyn Robert Rothschild was chairman of the company from 17 to 89. Although The Economist has a global emphasis on scope, and about two-thirds, 75 staff and journalists are based in London, Borough of Westminster, and is still owned by the Rothschild family. But they have no power. Oh, my goody gumdrops.
So you can see here what I flashed up on the screen, the text of what he's reading, and you might notice that the words "is still owned by the Rothschild family" does not appear here. He just kind of added that. He relayed that piece of information to the audience that he doesn't know to be true, but he's internalized from hearing it from people in his community trying to prove to him that Jews control the media. In an attempt to prove to the audience that his claim is correct, Alex consults a source, which he doesn't specify to the audience, but it's just the Wikipedia page on The Economist. He reads the passage that's supposed to support his claim that the Rothschilds own The Economist, and thus the articles about how Rothschild conspiracy theories are dangerous are a clear attempt at gaslighting their critics. However, that's not what his source says, because Alex's claim is actually incorrect. In that moment, while he's reading, Alex has two choices because he's live on air. He can either accept that his source doesn't back up his claim, or he can lie. And almost without exception, Alex will choose to lie because the belief he holds is more important than the truth. Alex can't allow the audience to question the support for the claim he's making because if he did, it would cause two major problems. The first is that his credibility would take a hit, and the entire ecosystem of conspiracy peddlers relies on pretending disreputable sources are actually super credible. That's a big part of the entire game. The second problem is that what's important to pass along to the audience isn't the false claim that the Rothschilds own The Economist. The actual goal of the message here is to lead the audience to the belief that underlies the claim, namely that the Jews run the media. If Alex completely fumbles his attempt to prove this claim that should be easy to demonstrate, you run the risk of the audience asking questions, and for a, curious question-asking brand of media, that's a real big problem for his business. So he lies. Alex's worldview is incoherent and based on things that rely on belief, not fact. So in order to make them seem more solidly grounded, he's required to lie to the audience. He knows that accepting reality and telling them that the things he yells about on air are just his thoughts and feelings would be a recipe for no one caring about what he says anymore. So the key is just lying and insisting that all the things you say are truthful and documented and knowing that you'll get away with it because no one's going to check. This is something that I think a lot of folks don't grasp about Alex, which is that he is an intentional liar. People further don't have a great understanding of the reasons why he lies and the purpose those lies serve to create support for the narrative constructs that he's selling to the audience. What I've just run through is one example, but there are many, and each offer an important insight into the priorities of the messaging on InfoWars and in the right-wing media ecosystem as a larger entity. If people paid greater attention to these instances and what they mean and why they're happening, they'd be much better equipped, I believe, to wrestle with this stuff from a pushback perspective. The next thing I want to bring up that people don't get generally about Alex Jones is that he is a fucking mess. I don't mean this in the way that's outwardly obvious to anyone who might watch his show, like how he yells at his staff constantly and he seems to be emotionally unstable. I mean that his life is a complete train wreck that spills into his show and ultimately can be said to be a part of some of his most dangerous work. On a very basic level, you can track Alex's emotional state by watching his show and seeing how doomed humanity is that day. If he's having a bad day, then the globalists have already won and we are walking dead. Hell, we probably deserve it because we weren't godly enough. Alex is in a bad mood. But conversely, if he's having a good day, then humanity is taking the lead in the fight and the globalists are on their back foot. We're going to win this thing. Nothing he says about the state of this imaginary conflict between humanity and the globalists is real. But if you pay close attention, you might notice that when he gets bad news about court or bankruptcy things, the globalists seem to be doing really well those days. It's hard not to see that the spiritual battle Alex is pretending to fight serves pretty regularly as a proxy for his own feelings about the viability of his own business and whether or not he's going to get through the next month. At the core of this point about Alex being a mess is my position that Alex has a complete lack of boundaries and is surrounded by nothing but enablers, to the point where his own personal issues end up fueling content on his show and there's no one to stop him from hurting others and himself. One of the ways this plays out is that Alex is a bit of an alcoholic. Many of his former employees have come forward about how much he drinks at work, and someone even released security camera footage of Alex's, he's going through bottles of liquor on a seemingly daily basis, as we can see him stare lovingly into a glass there. So while he's supposed to be dispensing the most important news about the fight against the devil, he's often just drunk on air. Oh, look at that loving. Ooh. And trust me, I come from the world of stand-up, where performers very often have a few drinks before getting on stage, but their job is to make an audience laugh, not to explain the secret hidden truths of the universe that are going to kill you and your family. If Alex were really just an entertainer and he wanted to be drunk while he rants on air, that would be fine. One Christmas Eve, he just threw hatchets around his studio. It was awesome. He was wasted and he was trying to hit his own camera with a hatchet. Where it gets incredibly dangerous is when the things he says while he's drunk cause catastrophic damage to people. In 2022, a puff piece masquerading as a documentary about Alex came out called Alex's War. It was an attempt to whitewash and sanitize him as he was going through the end of his Texas trial, which was the first in a series of cases he was facing around Sandy Hook. As part of the promotion for that film, Alex was interviewed by various people, notably Glenn Greenwald, who did his job very, very poorly. During that interview, Alex made a revelation that, if true, brings into sharp focus the true impact that his drinking on air has not just on himself, but the people that he's never even met. So here's a little clip from that.
Glenn, I'm sorry it's a long answer. What was the question? No.
What do you think led you into these kind of errors that you've been describing? And I think
it led.
Keep going.
Great question. It was just being on air 4 or 5 hours a day. You're very cavalier, and so you're not putting a journalistic filter on things. When I write an article, I would do that, or I make a film. I was like getting every piece together. Those were pretty good films. You watch my films from 20 years ago; they're pretty accurate. But you're on air cavalier and like drinking vodka and smoking cigarettes and like, you know, doing whatever, and you're like, yeah, I hear it's a bunch of fake BS, man, and like you're sued for it. Oh God. So
yeah, that's not good. If we take him at his word, which is admittedly an iffy thing to do, we're left to believe that Alex Jones was led to defame the families of murdered children, in part because he was drinking while he was on air, and it's easier just to roll with stuff than to be critical and in the moment. And in that interview, he actually says that he was drunk when he called these families actors more than once.
Interesting, and I've identified this with myself, is I think if you start off as kind of this outsider, you start off as like on Access TV, you start growing a little bit in influence, and suddenly you become, I think, one of the most influential people in the country with one of the largest audiences. It's hard, I think, sometimes to remind yourself, I'm not that guy on Access TV in Austin anymore, because it wasn't all that long ago when you weren't getting so much scrutiny, and then suddenly you're subjected to more scrutiny than anybody. And I think it's hard to try and, you know, kind of adapt with that, because it's kind of a slow and incremental
That's why you're a great writer, a great journal. That's exactly what I meant to say. Because, because they go back. They go back, and they go back 10 years, 5 years, and you're like, I had to drink a bottle of vodka that day. Jesus, I said that? You know, I mean, I'm going to be honest about it. I'm not going to lie to people. You know, so it's yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that clip even implies that Alex recognizes the horrible things that he said about these people, but that he didn't remember saying it, as if to say he was blacked out drunk while he was on air. Obviously, the families and loved ones of the people lost at Sandy Hook would have always had a painful road after that tragedy befell them, but it's important to also recognize that if Alex Jones wasn't such an unchecked alcoholic, maybe he could have saved them some additional pain by leaving them the fuck alone. Alex's emotions and personal demons guide the content of his show, and that's not something that he allows the audience to understand. The show itself is often little more than an outlet for Alex to lash out abusively at the people who still take him seriously, in service of trying to get them to send him more money. The whole dynamic that is in play there leads fairly interestingly into the next thing that I think that people don't generally understand or grasp about Alex Jones, which is one of the most frequent questions that I get from anybody, which is, does he mean what he says? Does he believe any of the things he's saying? And as to the matter of his beliefs, I would say absolutely not. But to the larger question, the answer I have is, who cares? The consequences of and the danger implied by Alex's output is the same, whether he means what he's saying or not. In the real world, there's little to no distinction between him meaning it and him just being like, oh, I'm just talking. It's an interesting question to ponder because whether or not Alex means the things he says has a academic input on what the kind of person he is, but it's ultimately just not really all that important to understanding him. Consider this clip.
And I don't want to ever see Wolf Blitzer hurt because Wolf Blitzer's a human maggot. I mean, you really want to start a fight with us? He just can't help it. Yeah, you do, don't you? You're begging for it. You're begging. You're begging to get your guts stomped out hard. And I don't know, Wolf, you ever had your guts stomped out, but you don't live after that happens. So not that I've ever stomped anybody's guts out. Actually, I have a couple times. It's not too nice. It takes people a long time to die after you stomp their guts out. But that's no threat to Wolf Blitzer.
Sure. I'd feel good if I was Wolf. In that clip, Alex is confessing to committing multiple murders, where he killed these people in ways that were intentionally slow and painful. He's embodying the part of a psychopath. So the question is, does he mean this? If he does, then he's a complete monster, bragging very graphically about killing multiple people, which he presumably got away with somehow. That obviously isn't true, so you have to consider that in that clip, Alex was telling his audience a graphic lie where he pretended to have killed a bunch of people because he wanted them to see him as that kind of a monster, which is weird. It's helpful to apply this line of thought to his comments about being drunk when talking about Sandy Hook. Either he's telling the truth, and he was so careless and maliciously irresponsible that he drunkenly caused victims of a horrible tragedy to be further terrorized, or he's lying to Glenn Greenwald because he wants Glenn and the audience to see him as that. Possibly he thinks that I was drunk at the time is a get-out-of-jail-free card to justify his actions, maybe because the enablers around him have always accepted that as an excuse. This may seem paradoxical, but it doesn't matter whether Alex means the things he's saying, and to dwell on that too much really only serves to waste your time trying to find an excuse for his actions. The real world is impacted harshly by the content and narratives that he disseminates, and that damage is done whether he means what he's saying or not. One of the prime areas that this is the case in areas surrounding race and whiteness. Alex will put forth absurd conspiracies involving race, and it's more or less a waste of time to spend too much time wondering if he believes the things he's saying on that front or not. The influence and messaging that his content has on its listeners is dangerous no matter what, and that intersection with the real world is far more important than what goes on inside an idiot's head. This is another aspect of Alex that people often lack clarity on. And that is, at his core, Alex is basically a white nationalism proponent who would never admit to holding that belief. However, since he's allowed to speak freely for hours a day on air, his words and ideas give him away. Alex doesn't believe in civil rights, really, which he can defend by appealing to the John Birch Society forefathers that he has and their fight against equality. Civil rights are a communist conspiracy, and the free market will fix everything if you don't want to serve people at your business based on their race. It's a load of bullshit, but It's the less important aspect of Alex's bigotry that I want to touch on here today. There's also a very emotional and visceral hatred that Alex feels about people who are in different social groups than himself. A lot of people talk about Alex's bigotry, but I cannot stress enough that the media completely misses the mark on how severe the bigotry that he has is. Mostly because I don't think anybody is watching this show except for me and his fans. Take, for example, this clip. This was inspired by Alex reading a headline about a school having a Muslim prom at their school.
Detroit school to hold Muslim girls only prom. Let me tell you something. It didn't hundreds of thousands Obama brought in. Everywhere I went in Austin yesterday, including a suburb, I went in 2 shops, a Starbucks, and then I went in a pool supply place. And there were like 7 people in the Starbucks. 3 of them were young Muslim girls with hoods over their heads drinking coffee after school. Then I went to the pool supply place, same deal. And all I'm telling you is, imagine if you were in Saudi Arabia, and in Saudi Arabia they were walking to stores and there were Christians and women with lipstick on and high heels everywhere. They'd start physically attacking you. But here we're tolerant. So I'm just saying, we're letting in people in mass that are not tolerant, that are the most oppressive, cult-like people on earth, and it freaks me out. You bet I'm freaked out. You bet I am. I got $3, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
And I don't like it.
All right. So Alex sees women in hijabs in public, and he cannot stand it. Their existence in public is an affront to how he believes the country should operate. If they want to live in America, then they need to cease from doing anything that causes discomfort to any straight, white, cis Christian man. Ironically, the thing that Alex is bothered by here is a perfect encapsulation about how different populations can absolutely integrate. What better image could you have than women in hijabs enjoying some Starbucks or shopping for pool supplies? It's like a Norman Rockwell painting or something. But that's the very thing that triggers Alex's hate and anger. Definitive proof that cultures can coexist and come together. It makes sense for him, maybe, I guess, on paper, to be freaked out if a person you assume to be from another country commits a violent crime. But Alex is freaked out by Muslim women shopping. Another important point on this racism front is the way that Alex lies in order to create more sensational stories meant to push his own racist worldview. In the time that I've been covering Alex's show, no greater example of this comes to mind than his coverage of the death of a woman named Kate Steinle. Steinle was a 32-year-old woman who was tragically killed by a stray bullet that ricocheted off the ground back in 2015. The person who was holding the gun was an undocumented immigrant, so immediately Alex began a demonization campaign, branding all immigrants with the blame for this crime. Alex would go on to tell horrible versions of what happened to this woman, one of which we're going to listen to here in a minute, so get ready. But before we do, it's important to understand that nothing he's saying is true. The man who was holding the gun did not fire it intentionally. He found something on the ground that was covered in a rag. When he picked it up, he realized it was a gun as it discharged, with the bullet ricocheting off the ground and hitting Miss Steinle. It was a tragic incident, but it clearly wasn't one that involved malice or any intent to cause harm. All of this had been worked out in court by the time that Alex got on air and covered the story this way.
I just think that Trump had a chance a long time ago to stop this. He could have done the Insurgency Act. He could have stopped these low-life people. Look at Kate Steinle. That poor woman was shot to death, and what did they do? They allowed sanctuary cities. Those things should have been stopped.
Yeah, the illegal alien just wanted to kill her because she was white. And then the liberals went, well, you're a Mexican who's been deported 5 times. You're allowed to murder her. And then they said he's a victim, and now he's suing the jail where he was held. She was with her dad. She just shot her in the back for fun.
How safe does that make you feel in America?
Well, I mean, here's my deal. I don't care if you're brown or white. You don't want anybody being able to just shoot a young woman in the back for no reason.
You're right.
And he shot her because she was beautiful. And if you notice anything, I don't care if a beautiful black woman, brown woman, white woman. There are a lot of people jealous of beautiful women. And Kate Steinle was gorgeous, beautiful. And he killed her because he was pissed and jealous and thought that that was her older boyfriend. It was her dad hugging her. And they were crying and talking about family members that had just died. And he saw that and thought he saw a couple together, and he murdered her because he was jealous.
So Alex had all the optics there that he needed to turn this tragedy into a story meant to incite feelings of racism in his largely white audience. And naturally, he jumped at the chance. None of the things he says about the shooting there are true. They're just details he's pulled out of his imagination to make this story more compelling to the audience. And you may notice that the details he comes up with are essentially boilerplate white supremacist shit you see in their racist propaganda. The deification of the white victim whose only crime was being too beautiful, the rage and jealousy of the lustful non-white person who's unable to have this white woman sexually, the farce that the state just turns a blind eye to any case where a white person is the victim. This is textbook stuff that you see on any white supremacist message board, and it makes sense that that's the stuff that hangs out in Alex's subconscious, and why these details are the ones that he projects onto a case like this. His mind is basically a white supremacist message board itself. Almost every source of information he's valued through his life has either been overtly white supremacist or vaguely crypto-white supremacist. It's the water that he swims in, so it's no shock that he's just soaked in it. This is the face of the kind of racism and bigotry you find with shocking regularity on Alex's show, and that the media doesn't do a good job of covering. You can see this editorializing and lying about stories covering race over the years, and more recently you see Alex doing the same types of smear campaigns against members of the LGBTQ community because they've been deemed the primary target for othering by the right-wing media. In order to appropriately push back against this brand of bigotry, it's critical to understand that this is the kind of rhetoric that's commonplace on a widely listened to outlet like InfoWars. It's the bread and butter of a demagogue who's associated with the last president. He's a repeat guest on the largest podcast in the world. He's friendly with one of the highest rated news figures in the past decade in Tucker Carlson, and was directly associated with multiple people who have been convicted of seditious conspiracy over their actions on January 6th. It's no small matter, and it becomes critically important to accurately convey the kind of white identity extremist outlet that Alex is running. And unfortunately, that leads me to the last thing that I think that people don't generally understand, and that is that it's almost impossible to cover Alex Jones. He doesn't operate within reality. He doesn't care. He just lies about everything. So when you are somebody who, is trying to cover him or trying to work on like assessment of these things, and you work within a formal professional setting, you're bound by the rules of journalism that he can just break willy-nilly. And over the time that I've spent studying him, I find that almost everything that people try to do to try and cover him works into his best interest. He is able to use lies and dodges in order to turn coverage that's supposed to be negative into something that's positive. And I take it as somewhat of a mark of pride that Alex has never mentioned us on his show, despite being clearly very aware of us. I was a special expert in the Texas defamation case. I sat in a deposition room with him for an entire day. We've been featured in the New York Times and CNN, in both cases working with people that Alex really hates, like Elizabeth Williamson and Brian Stelter, respectively. Alex's incompetent lawyer, Norm Pattis, even complained about us on in his bankruptcy hearings. And I think that through the process of doing the show, I've realized that you have to abandon impartiality. If you're going to cover this, the goal that I had of stepping into this and having an impartial, completely fair perspective is literally impossible. And it's a goal that it seems like a good idea, but perhaps should not be pursued. And I think that I had a couple more thoughts about that, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it there because I'd like to take some questions if people have questions, and we have a bit of time to do that. So does anybody have any questions?